first want to ask you who you are and everything, since maybe, not everybody may know who you are because you work behind the scenes. Actually, have you ever been in front of the camera?
Very rarely. I like being behind the camera. I'm much better at it. But hi, everybody. I'm Beth Godvik. I'm a writer producer at CBS Chicago. I'm also a council member for the WGA East, and I'm an adjunct professor, adjunct instructor at DePaul University. So I do a lot of things.
How long have you been at DePaul?
Oh my goodness. Well, my daughter's 10 now, and I was there before she was born. Um, so I think I'm going to say since 2010. It's not consecutive. Since some adjunct, I teach a class every so often. Like I'm not teaching right now, but usually I teach writing for broadcast and news producing.
Okay, and how do you like teaching?
Oh, I love it. It's a great boost. Like it's a great reminder of why I do what I do, like why I love journalism and broadcast and everything. Because the kids are so passionate. They're so excited to get into our business, which is a wild business at
Yeah.
times. And so it kind of rejuvenates your spirit. It's like you can be having a cruddy day and be like, I don't know why I'm getting up to go to work at 4 in the morning or, whatever time your team no sleep is. And they're just so excited to get into it. They're like, this is so cool. And so it's a nice reminder of like, oh yeah, what I do is really cool. So, and then it's nice too to be able to say, hey, I have some wisdom. I can pass this on to you. I can help and kind of pay it forward because I got a lot of help from people and I get a leg up and you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
So you can encourage them like ask or do this or like you can also kind of help them follow maybe a path they weren't expecting. Like when I went to DePaul, because I'm a DePaul alum, I was going to be print journalism. I was going to write for the Tribune. I was like, I had it all figured out, as you do when you're 20 and you
Right.
don't really know. Um, and I had this great professor, shout out Professor Bruce Evanson. And I took journalism with him, and he's like, you should take my broadcast class. And I was like, okay, fine. And I took it, and he's like, you just have this voice. The way you write is just for TV. He's like, you should really consider it. And so I was just like, okay. And then I got an internship, and I was like, oh, like I kind of like this. And the internship was great because I discovered I was also like, I'm going to be a reporter. And then I was like, oh no, they have to go out in the cold and snow,
Yeah.
or they're in the middle of the heat, or, sometimes they're in not really nice locations
Mm.
and they have to always look good on camera. And, sometimes it's nice to go to work with your hair in a ponytail and be wearing your sweats or your yoga pants. So I was kind of like, oh, like, yeah, I'm going to rethink this. And then I started sitting with the producers at my internship and I was just like, oh, you're kind of in charge. Like you tell everybody what to do. Like I I could do that. I'm bossy. I'm like, I own this. I'm like, my mom always jokes that I was in management training from the time I was 2. Like I'm very good at directing people and be like, you need to do this. So kind of just it helped out that way. And so now I'm so fortunate that I have a lot of students who come to me. Like I'm still in touch with a ton of students that I've taught from 10 years ago. And it's fun to see their careers and how they're doing. And, I'm a little like a proud mama bear, like, yeah, they're doing awesome. Or they'll come to me later and say, you know what, I've done this for a while. I don't know if this is the right thing. And I'll be like, you know what, that's okay. Like you got to find what works for you. It's not for everybody.
Wait, now where did you go to college that you did this internship?
I went to DePaul University, so Blue Demon, and I actually did 3 internships. I interned at Channel 7, ABC 7 on the planning desk. And then I would go out with reporters. I'd do a lot of research and things like that. And I would go out with reporters maybe once a week. And then I went to WTTW when Chicago Tonight was still a single issue show. So they would have a roundtable discussion. I worked with a great Sean Calloway, who was so kind with his time and just encouraging. Like, he's kind of a big deal on that show. He was the host and everything. And he didn't have to take time for an intern, but he was very lovely. And everybody there was really great and encouraging. And then I interned at CBS 2 Chicago. I was political intern with Mike Flannery, and that was super fun. Like I love politics, Chicago politics. are
Mhm.
just amazing, and such a long, long history. And so it was really fun to be doing that. And again, he was so kind with his time and his knowledge, and everybody there was great. And I joked with one of the producers at the time, who was a little bit older. And I said, "Oh, when you're thinking you're ready to retire, let me know." And I come back and visit every so often, and I would see him. And when I got my job, I came back in 2004, and I became a writer there. And I was freelance. And then about a year later, this producer, John Whelan, decided to retire. He was a lovely man. And I ended up literally getting his job. I got his spot. It was just like a weird kind of kismet thing. It was so nice. And it was nice to come back and be home and know all the people and know the history of the station. It was great.
Wait, when was that you got this?
I first came back and had my full time. Well, I was a freelancer for about a year. I started in 2004 and then was made full time in 2005. So
Whoa,
I've
so it's been
I've been
almost 20 years.
yeah, it'll be 20 years in August, which is it's so wild to think that, because it doesn't feel like that at all. Well, I even look at my daughter who's 10 and I'm like, how are you 10? Like you were
Yeah.
just born. Like I just sent you to kindergarten. And yeah, it's funny. Time just flies.
Well, I noticed that you have an Emmy behind you. What awards have you won, and what is that Emmy for?
That is one of my two Emmys. I'm very fortunate. I work with a great team, and we have won Best Morning Newscast. When I worked on it, we've won it twice. I think we've won it three times total. But this is for one of our snow coverage. I think.
I love snow stories.
Oh, and everybody relates to weather.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
even if you're in sunny California, you're like, oh, it's snowing. Like we can all relate to that. Like people don't always relate to, the big political stories, or when, big Chicagoan passes away or something, but everybody gets weather. So I think that's the February snowstorm. We also had a November snowstorm that we won for. My daughter's really funny. She's like, you only win when it snows. Just like, well, I'm like, I'm glad you're not voting. She would
Right.
vote for the other stuff.
No, but it is a great story, and also there's so much you can do visually, and there's so many things that reporters can do, so I can see why it wins awards because it's also great spot coverage. And how
And
many
it's
shootings
something,
do we have? I mean,
right, well, and whether it's something everybody needs to
yeah.
know. Like you need to know, there's going to be another big snow event tomorrow. And so we're going to go on early. We're going to start at 4 a.m. And it's things like, people, what do I dress my kid in to go to school? Am I going to be able to make it to work? Can I pull out of my garage, or do I have to take the CTA, or should I ask my boss if I can work from home? Or do I need to shovel the sidewalk for our older neighbor? There's so many things that affect it. And or even just the memes of like, I gotta get the milk and bread, what are we gonna do? It really, weather is the one thing that unites us no matter what, because we can all relate to it. It's just like, oh God, I hope my heat still works. Or like today we had a story about a burst water main in Dixon, and like those people there, they don't have water, and that's a big deal. So it's like, and then not to mention the fact that their whole street is flooded and it's icy, and it's one of those things where you're like, but everybody relates to it. They're like, oh man, that's awful. I'm so glad it's not me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and also, I mean, of course, one of the most famous stories about Chicago connected to politics was the Blandick, Jane Byrne election, and he lost
Right.
because of the do you know about that?
Oh yeah. So when I was a kid, I remember Council Wars from when I was little. Council Wars in like 1983. That's a little after what you're talking about. That was when Mayor Harold Washington got elected. But yeah, I remember it was a snowstorm of 79, and it just snowed and snowed and snowed, and they didn't get the plows out, and so people couldn't go anywhere. Like we have pictures of, I think I was like 2 at the time, and the snow, I mean, it's way way over my head, but the snow is taller than my mom. Like it's all dug out, and it was like when you would walk, you were looking in like tunnels, like because you couldn't see things around you. And so people basically stayed home because you couldn't go anywhere, and they were really mad. And so because of that, people were like, nope, they threw him out of office. We got our first female mayor, Jane Byrne, and and now that is why that when it snows, Chicago is on it, because all the politicians know that you are going to complain or you are going to end up voting and go, you're done. Remember when I couldn't go to work because you didn't plow my street? Like, you're out. And
Right.
it's such a big deal. And it's funny when you go to other cities and you talk about that, like they do not have, even places that are used to getting snow, their snow clearing capacity is nothing like Chicago's. And
Right.
I lived in Columbus for 3 years, and just like they freak out, and they're not that much further south, but they freak out when it snows. And like they have to tell people, okay, if you're in an accident, you need to pull over. The police may not be able to come because there's so many. So just exchange information. And I remember the first time we did it on the air, I was like, what? Like, why don't people know this? It's just what you do. And it's just, but it really is just like, it's such a Chicago thing. Or even explaining to one of my coworkers about dibs, and she's from a warm weather place. And she's like, yeah, some idiot put his lawn chair out in the street. And we're like, don't move it. And
Don't
she's
move
like,
it.
well, I want to park there. And we're like, no, don't move the car. Like you'll have your windshield iced or like something. Like you can't do that. Like even my very mild mannered mom, like my mom is very much almost like Betty White. She's just friendly to everybody. She's so sweet. But like some lady took her dibs spot on our block, and she had pulled in and the woman was still in the car. And my mom pulled up next to her and she's like, you're in my spot. You need to move. Like I thought she was going to throw down this
Right.
woman. Like it's, yeah, snow is so serious in Chicago. And, I think you have to understand that. But the politics thing, when people don't know about it, they're like, wait, somebody got thrown out of office because they didn't clear the streets. And you're like, yeah, like,
But it wasn't just that. It was also a South Side, North Side thing because didn't he not really service the South Side as he should? And then Jane Byrne brought that up, and then it was also a political thing as well.
oh, yeah. It
I
was
think the
like, you
North Side
have to
was,
serve
or
the
like
whole
the L
city.
skipped a bunch of street stops or something, or
I think there were problems with and I don't want to talk out of turn because I'm not as familiar with that part, but there were problems with the trains not being able to get to the south side because the tracks weren't necessarily plowed, or just like from where they were coming from and things like that. And so people who had to go to work, they couldn't even rely on the CTA. And I remember late in Mayor Daley's administration, the second Mayor Daley, Richard M., um, when we had a big snowstorm, he was like, get the trains to the south side, get them on the red line. And like, it was kind of like there were a couple of people rumbling, who take the brown line. My train was, and it was like, okay, but you probably have other options. Like,
Mhm.
and sometimes people who need those trains on the south side, that's what they do. You have people who are taking like two buses just to get to the train to get where they're going. And it's not like they can be like, oh, my neighbor will just drive me. So like it's a very big need. And Jane Byrne was really great about mobilizing people in the African American community, and people of lesser who weren't getting what they needed, and saying, hey, you need to speak up, like come support me, I'm going to work with you. And then when she had her reelection, she had some issues during her terms, but
Of
when
course.
she went up for reelection, she did not have their same support, because they were like, well, we supported you and you didn't quite do everything you were going to say, which I think we all know happens just normally. Politicians promise stuff and they can't always deliver, sometimes through no fault of their own, sometimes through big faults of their own. So
Well, yeah, because we see that now. I mean, in politics, in Chicago politics, some people will say, "Wait a," I mean, I've seen this because I was going to, through Zoom, or not through Zoom, but through live stream. I went to city council meetings, and people were saying, "We're gonna vote you out. We're gonna vote you out. If you continue this, we can vote you." And I'm like, "Wow." So yeah, Chicago. See, I think the thing is because you grew up in Chicago, but I think the thing is that people who don't live here, they think they can just like, okay, this is what I've noticed that people live in the suburbs or wherever. And then they'll just complain about Chicago. And I say, move to the city and get involved, because once the aldermen find out if people care, they'll start taking some action. But people don't believe that there's actually a democracy working here.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. You have to speak up. Like I call our alderman's office for different things. Sometimes it's just to ask questions. Sometimes it's like, hey, I saw a rat in our alley. What are you going to do about it? And, they'll say, okay, we'll bait your alley. Or, we live near a school and some of the sidewalks were very broken and a tripping hazard. And there's a lot of kids that walk here, and I don't want them falling on my sidewalk. And so the alderman's office was able to get the sidewalks redone. It wasn't under the shared sidewalk program. I don't remember how he did it. Maybe it was safe passage, but you're totally right. If you call and you're active and you say, hey, like if it's calling, emailing, Facebooking, social media, whatever, going to community meetings, going to the beat meetings, when they see you're involved, they get it. We just had our state rep out canvassing the neighborhood, getting ready for the primary, and she happens to not be. She's running unopposed, and so she was out canvassing for other people. But I had a great talk with her. Like she was on my porch, and we had a great talk about different things. I found out about some programs that she's promoting, and I was like, that's, and like my producer brain is like, oh, okay, great. We could do like an interview, or this is what we talk, and it's things that are important. And sometimes people don't always know about things. Like some city agencies are better than others about getting the word out about things. And, it's things we all use, and we're all paying for this stuff. Like, whether or not you go to the city parks or you go to the beaches, you're paying for them. So like you should go and get your money's worth. Same thing with the library. Like the Chicago Public Library is such a great resource that is so underused for so many people. And they have great programs. And it's not just all kid focused, like, oh, and go take out a book and you're done. Like they have so many different things. There's like educational stuff they do. They do family stuff. They do arts and crafts. They do like other learning opportunities. And it's just, when you're involved, more, but you have to say, this is what I want, or like, why aren't we doing this? And you kind of make a little bit of a stink about it. But if you don't ask, you don't get.
Right. Because I've talked to people who will say, oh, the violence, like for South Loop, their complaints. Like people will say, I live in the South Loop and it's really horrible. The violence has increased. I'm like, are you calling your alderman? No, she's horrible. I'm like, no, but see, if she knows that, if she knows what you're thinking, then she'll
Right.
pay attention and she'll see a pattern. I mean, I don't, that's obviously not my alderman, but I just think more people should get involved. But I mean, speaking of the violence, okay. So one thing I noticed about Chicago media is there are so many shooting stories, so many violent stories, and people will say they don't like to watch the news because of all the violence coverage. Okay, so as a producer, what do you think of that?
I heard it. And just as a viewer, I get it. Like it's hard to watch when it's like all these bad things happened, and you do have to know about it. Sometimes I think we can do a little bit of a better job of spreading it out or connecting, or even trying to follow up like, okay, this happened and now what's being done about it. And we've done some of those stories where you try and say like, this is a problem, or this is an area where a lot of shootings happened, and now maybe they got cameras, or they have an increased police presence, or they have more community involvement, or there's a group on the south side, and of course their name just went out of my head, but it was a bunch of moms who were like, we're not going to take this anymore, and they're doing something about it. And so sometimes you can have stories where you showcase, okay, here's what happened, but here's what's going on. And that's kind of one of the nice things about journalism, where you can do things to make a change. You're not just reporting on, oh, everything's horrible and everything's bad. And I think too, especially in Chicago, like people know, like you're going to tell us what happened and got to get the gritty stuff out there. But also, like, you want to highlight the community. Like, there's a lot of good things on. My husband's family is from out of state. And every so often they would watch the news and be like, oh my gosh, Chicago's like so scary. And like, I can't believe you live there. And, I don't know what, like for the ones who hadn't been to our house, I don't know what they imagine we live in. But like, I mean, we're typical Chicago. We have the neighborhood, we got our block, we have block parties, things like that. The kids play out on the street, they ride their bikes back and forth. But people don't necessarily have that image. So it is nice when you're able to highlight, here's people doing good stuff, here's things that are going right, or like here's things working together. And but I totally get it, where it's just like, oh, all you do is shootings. Like, well, that's not all we do, but I can understand the perception of it. And sometimes it's just that's what the news is, and we have to tell you what's going on. Like, we'll tell you the politics stuff, or what's going on in city council and the mayor and the governor and things like that. But sometimes it is like, hey, this happened and you should know about it.
Yeah, but I mean, in some cases, though, there are a couple things. One is it gives Chicago a bad image because there's so much violence being reported. But then at the same time, I've noticed that various media outlets have a section, Chicago crime. So people, they say they don't want to look at it, but then obviously they're clicking. It's like the top story, type of story to click
It,
on.
it's a hard thing to balance because if you're ever in research meetings and things like that, people will say, "Oh, I don't want to see that. I want to see good news." And it's like, but this is what you watch. Like you're telling us that, but when it comes to what you actually watch, that's not it. And I don't think that necessarily means people want like the gloom and doom kind of thing. I think it's just kind of a balance. And I do think people really do want like the positive stories and the making a difference stories, the change, and they want you to dive deeper into stuff. Like, Chicagoans are very like they don't like the frou-frou stuff. They don't need all the glitter and pizzazz and all that kind of thing. Like they can take the meat and potatoes and they get it. But they also want a little dessert. Like it's nice to end your day on like a fun little story that makes you go, "Oh, okay, great. The world's not going to end and life is good." And.
I love kicker stories. That's my favorite.
Oh, they're so fun to write. You can just have a good time with them. I have one that I saved on my phone. I'm going to say that and I won't have it to bring up, but it's it's the dumbest story, but it makes me laugh every time I see it. And partially it has to do with our anchor's reaction. I was producing that day for Marie Saavedra. She anchors our 11 a.m. and our 4 p.m. and she's so fantastic to work with. And it's a story about a guy whose video went viral because he was on like a Zoom call or something in his home office, and the squirrel got inside his house. And he had apparently the squirrel had done this before. It was not like an uncommon occurrence. And the guy sees the squirrel like in the corner, and you can't see it on the video. And the guy grabs the bat. And he's ready. And he's like ready, and he's still on his Zoom call and trying to be calm. And then the squirrel like jumps up to his desk and he just starts screaming and goes wild and he's like smacking things around and then he runs out of the room. And it's just like the most ridiculous thing ever. And it's so funny. And so I had told Marie, I'm like, "Oh, we have a really great kicker, but I'm not going to tell you about it because I just want your reaction." And she's like, "Okay, great." And so she's reading the script and she reads the intro and then we go to the video and we let it play for a long time, and then she was supposed to read more and she was laughing so hard she started crying and she could not read anything. And so then our weather person, Rob Ellis, was there, and she tried to be like, "Okay, Rob, you try." And he's like, "No, I can't. I just can't." And like they like I think we put up like the 7-day forecast because neither one of them could talk because they were
That's
just
cool.
laughing so hard, and it was so funny to watch. So I have that saved for like when you're having a bad day, you have like a good video to watch and you're like, okay. But like we need things like that because life is hard. So you need to have like the fun moments and the like, see, your life is not as bad as this man who keeps getting attacked by this random squirrel.
But also, I mean, it's real. That's what's great about live TV is those things happen. People are laughing and so forth. And okay, these are actual humans. It's not some AI thing or some pre-taped cold situation. So,
Right. It's fun to
but
be live.
but I was asking about your students because okay, it's not like, obviously there's so much media out there, media outlets like digital and so forth and apps. And actually it surprises me when you tell me that your students at DePaul are excited because what makes them want to go into TV? Or is it just everything digital also? Or
Well, I always talk to them about like if you're going to be print, if you think you're going to be magazine, if you're going to be a web writer, if you're going to be a podcaster, you need to learn about broadcast journalism and about the visual media because no matter what you do, if you're a YouTube person, if you're an influencer, see, I'm not cool enough to know all the lingo, but if you're a TikToker, whatever, you need to think like visually and you need to think of how do I tell this story?
yeah.
And that's broadcast journalism. And anybody who wants to do print or radio or anything else or just have a blog, they need to all think about that because it's something too when you do interviews, you need to think about how you're talking to somebody, what you're going to say, your visual space, your visual setup, and how you put things together. Like there's so many more jobs than there used to be for people to work in online media, be it at like a traditional newspaper kind of setup or something like The Onion or other different things like BuzzFeed, where okay, yes, it's more print kind of, it skews more print traditional, but you have to think visually and you have to think appealing and what's going to grab them and what's the headline or what's the tease and like, what's the clickbait to get people to go in. And that's such a broadcast thing. So it has like a wide net. It casts into everything.
Okay, so is that what they're excited about, or what are they excited about? Are they excited? Do they want to go into TV or what?
Well, it's really funny for the most part whenever they come to class, or even when we get somebody visiting the station and we talk to them, they're always like, I'm going to be a reporter. I'm going to be on air. And I'm like, okay. And you don't want to crush their hopes and spirits, but you're like, if you're a producer, you get to tell everybody what to do and you're behind the scenes and you can go from a small market to a bigger market faster
Yep.
because those are the jobs that are there because everybody wants to be on TV. And it is so hard to be on camera because
Yeah.
it's not only that you have to be good at your job, you're telling the story, you have to be good, but then it's also just your look and
Yep.
you're dealing with the public. And we know that people on Twitter are not always the nicest. They don't have the manners. And either on other social media too, people will just say things and you're like, wow, okay. So you have to have a thick skin. And then different bosses, you have all these people looking at you who are like, oh, well, I like your look. And oh, well, maybe you're a blonde. Well, I'd rather have a redhead or, diversity. That is the one thing that's been so nice to see of how much the industry overall has been working to change and become more diverse and put more different faces on TV so that people can see someone who looks like them telling them about what's happening in their community. But yeah, being on air, just being a reporter is tough for so many reasons other than just it's not good. It's not enough to just be good at your job.
When also you have to write on the fly. I mean, I think reporting is so hard because, yeah, especially TV reporting, because you have to go to the scene and then if there's nothing happening at that moment, you have to be able to punt for 2 minutes because that's what they give you. I mean, so they're throwing it to you and you're like, okay, this is what's happening, da da da. And the person may not have come out of their house or whatever. So then you got to give background, but then you've also got, you can't bury the lead. You got to do all these things. And also you have to go to sometimes you have to go somewhere at like 3 in the morning. And like you were saying, some neighborhoods that are pretty, not, not so safe. And I think it's really hard. I don't think people understand, but I think that the good medium is for people to be digital. Like if they want to go on TV, but they're producer jobs, set up your YouTube or Vimeo or whatever and have your own quote unquote show and do your own videos because that can be very satisfying.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it's something too that people don't realize they can make into a career, be it going through more traditional media, like maybe start that way, you get a portfolio, and then you go into a bigger company, or like even creating it through your own channel. I mean, you're doing pretty well. You've gone your own way and you're doing well.
Oh, well, okay, let's just say this. This is what I tell the students I teach at Columbia and my first day is tomorrow. That I always say to them, even if you don't make money directly through what you're doing, your pursuits, it's really great for visibility because people all they got to do is do a search on you and they can see what you can do. So it definitely
Mhm.
helped me. Like I definitely achieved my radio dreams and actually I surpassed my radio dreams. So it definitely helped me out. But it's also because I have a passion for content. And that's the thing, that's the thing I tell people because I think this journalism is not it's very hard and it's not glamorous.
No, we were just having this discussion in the newsroom today of you have to love what you do. You have to be
Yeah.
passionate about it because, there are crazy hours. You're going to go to work. Like somebody was asking me about my schedule over the years. And it's like, I was a midnight writer. I worked weekends. I was a 3 a.m. writer, and now I do a bunch of different things. I write on the morning show and I produce other segments, but there's still days where it's rough to get up in the morning and you're like,
Right.
I'm really tired. But if you love it, you're gonna do it. And even the days when you're working holidays where everybody else is like, oh, I'm going home for Thanksgiving, and you're like, that's great. I'm
Right.
not. It's you really have to be like, but this is what I want to do. This is my passion and I'm here for this. And, because there are days that are frankly just gonna stink.
Yeah.
And that's what gets you through them where you're like, but I really love this and I have something good. Or like, there are times where everybody goes through rough patches or like, I've been through rounds of layoffs and like, thankfully I'm very lucky. I have, I didn't get laid off, but I saw it. And even though I didn't get laid off, it was hard to come to work because you knew that the people you really liked weren't there anymore, or just you're like, I'm gonna have more work to do.
Right.
And it's hard. Like mentally, it's tough. Like you have to be strong mentally to do this. And I mean, that's just the day to day of getting up and going to work, not to mention some of the stuff we cover and some of the things we see that the public doesn't see. And it's really disturb. There are days where you're like, I've been working at my desk watching video and been like, okay, I wrote this and I made it and it's for the air. And I'll look at my coworkers and say, I need to take a break. Like I need a minute. That was a lot. And like everybody gets it. We also talk in the newsroom. We're very big on therapy. Like therapy is really helpful. Even if you're not in television news with all the blood and gore and whatever you want to call it, just therapy is good because it helps you understand yourself. It helps you understand other people and it helps you know you're not alone and you can get through this. And there are things that you can reach out for. Like I'm really proud now. We're doing a new segment we call Mental Health Minute. And it's not about changing the world, but it's about saying like mental health and therapy are long-term things. But we look at different ways you can get like a mini boost. It's like, okay, well, you're having a bad day. What can you do that takes a minute or maybe 5 minutes? And it gives you a reset and it helps you like spark up and, like, okay, I can get through this. I can do this. And there are little things like breathing things. I'm trying to think what else we done. How just take a dance break or like take a moment and, go read a book for 5 minutes, get lost in a story, all things that, they're little things that will just help you. And that's such a great thing for me. I'm so fortunate. I went to my bosses. I worked with Marie Saavedra again on this. She and I ended up talking and saying like, oh, we both take mental health walks, especially after the pandemic. I think a lot of people really understood mental health is very important and we need to do more for it. And so she and I were just one day talking of like, oh, I'm going on my mental health walk. And then we're like, oh, we both do this. And like, we should encourage more people to do this. And then it kind of became what if you went on a mental health walk and we filmed it and we talked to somebody about, hey, what else can you do for your mental health and just make it a short little thing. And now we're doing it and we're really excited to just share them with people. And like, and it's the one thing that I've done in my career where everybody's been really positive. Like it's been like, that's such a breath of fresh air, or, oh, I tried that the other day and it was really helpful, or just, I love what you do. Like I keep waiting for someone to be like, those are horrible, but like they've all been really positive. And so like, I'm getting a mental health boost from doing it. So it's really great. And it's fun to try something new. And I think too, like you said, we're covering so many things that it's like, we could all use a little mental health minute.
Yeah, but are these experts coming on, or what is in the mental health minute?
So what we do is we meet with a mental health expert. We've had psychologists, psychiatrists, different people who are therapists. We've had people from Loyola Medicine. We had people from UIC. Let's see, I'm trying to think of everybody else we've had. We've had people from Advocate Children's, just a little bit of everything, and they'll give us a tip. Like one of the easy ones we did, we actually ended up doing it as a piece because my daughter told me about it because their school counselor told them. She calls it the 5. So in our house, it's the 5, and it's really easy. It's you slide your finger up, and when you're doing that, you take a deep breath in, and then you slide down and you exhale. And you do that for every single finger. It takes maybe 30 seconds to do your whole hand. And it just helps you calm down. It's getting oxygen into your blood. It's slowing your heart rate. And it's just, so when you're feeling overwhelmed, you're anxious, or maybe something made you really mad, you just look at your hand and you're like, okay, do this. and it helps you calm down. And it's something. So those are all of our kinds of tips. Like they're nothing really, really hard. They're nothing that's like, this is going to take you a month to master it. It's all little things that it's like, this can give you a quick boost. Like the other day we did one about take a dance break, and it's literally just, hey, you're in the car bopping along, or you're putting on your makeup, like put on a song and kind of just, you don't have to have like this big flash dance kind of musical number. It's just something where you're just rocking back and forth and you're getting into it. And it kind of just releases your endorphins and helps you go, okay, today's not that bad. Like I can do this.
Yeah, because I used to work at when I was at WGN Radio in the newsroom. I worked, I got to work before dawn, and then when dawn hit, I just stepped away from the desk from all the toxic information, the murders and stuff, and then I just watched the sun for like maybe a minute, outside the window. And also, what I learned is you should just take breaks and just even if you walk to another space and
Mm-hmm.
then you walk back to your computer. But I remember during the pandemic, you guys were in the middle of the looting and the rioting, and I did hear that somebody at CBS 2 got PTSD, like they had to withdraw. Like I think it was a photographer or
Um,
something, but I mean you don't have to
I
name the
don't
person, but okay.
I don't specifically know about that one, but I mean,
Okay.
it doesn't surprise me because literally our building, we're in block 37. And so we can go to the mall, and that's where people were looting. And it was even to the point that there's a block 37 garage where the public can park, and then CBS has its own garage. And um, our security was monitoring when the garage door could go up and down so people could come in, and it was scary. It was kind of that weird time where you're covering something that you're right in the middle of happening, so you almost have blinders on because you're like, I have to do my job. But also I was in the newsroom, I wasn't with our crews, and like we are so fortunate that our bosses prioritize safety. They were like, no, like every so often there'll be some kind of incident. Like for the most part, it doesn't happen to our crews, but we'll hear about other people in the city. And our bosses will start off the email by saying, no story is worth your life. Like,
Wow.
don't get hurt, back off. Like, if you don't get the story, that's okay. And I mean, that hasn't always been the case. We've had bosses who I don't think they would want you to put your life at risk, but maybe they didn't exactly say that. But like now, our bosses are very much like they'll check in on people after incidents. Like, it's very much they're on the phone like after they hear about something. How are you? Are you okay? And then the next day checking in, and that's such a great thing to see. Um, but yeah, like during the looting, it
But you
was
guys were literally in the middle of it. Because I
yeah,
remember,
it
yeah.
it was surreal. Like I remember at one point I was going to different spots in the newsroom and upstairs in one of our break rooms and taking my iPhone and trying to see if I could like shoot down for the video of the looters breaking into the mall. And it was like,
Right.
and now I look back on it, I'm like, wow, that was really bizarre. But at the
Right.
time, you go into almost like just this get it done, and in a way, kind of like leave your body because you're like, I have to do this. And it's funny, I don't feel like that one affected me as much because I felt like, okay, well, I don't feel like looters are going to break into a TV station. I don't know why I felt like that, but we were also up higher. So I didn't feel like, oh no, like it was concerning, but I was never afraid for my safety. And then when it was more time for me to leave, things they're much calmer. More police were out, people had gone home because they were like, whatever. But I remember we had one crew who they stuck their head out the back door and they were live, and the police were coming in, and the police said to him, did you see where the looters went? And he's like, yeah, I think they went that way. And the police said, you need to go back inside. And it's just a crazy thing. And I remember another one of our crews, Dave Savini, was out with his photographer, and um, he was just looking at all the Macy's windows that had been smashed, and people were still inside grabbing things, and it was just like you're just like, this is so. It felt like you were in a movie,
Right.
but clearly you weren't in a movie.
Yeah, well, I think people who didn't live or work in it. Okay, so I'm talking throughout the US, but people who did not live or work in it, they had no idea how it was dangerous, it was crazy, it was scary, especially like I live in a building where they tried to break in. Okay, so, there's not much protection, but it depends where you were. Anyway, that's why the reason why I forgot your place is because I did hear that somebody had got PTSD. And then also I talked to other markets where that was happening, and I tried to tell people about what was going on and they just really downplayed. It was very frustrating. But I was gonna say about the mental health thing, when I think before people were afraid to talk about mental health. And okay, so this is for the INBA as well. We were at an INBA conference and people were sharing about their mental health struggles. And I'm sure when we were younger, people did not used to talk about medication. They used to not talk about mental health. So why do you think there's more of an acceptance about it now?
I think you have people who have just come out and shared their stories, and just the simple phrase of it's okay not to be okay. And I think more people need to hear that. And in my family, we were always very open about mental health. It was like, hey, it's okay to reach out for help if you need it. Like that, there's no shame in this. And so I was very lucky. I grew up where it's like, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, like let's talk about it. And even when I had my daughter, she was born early, and it was very stressful. She was very little, and I'm trying to remember what they called it because it wasn't an emergency C-section, but I think they technically called it a planned C-section. But she was a month early, and it was like went to the doctor one day, and they're like, "So okay, we're gonna do this tomorrow," and it was like, "Oh, all right." Um, and so then the first month of having her, we had to go to the doctor even more so than you did with the normal newborn. And I had a lot of anxiety, and they never officially, like, I was really lucky. I had a lot of great people around me. The doctors were all really good. They would all check in. And I was never officially diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I had postpartum anxiety.
Hmm.
Um, but there's so many people who have things like that who don't know to reach out, or they don't know where to turn, or they don't feel, especially with new moms, they don't feel like they can say, this does not feel like it's supposed to, or like what society tells you, you're supposed to be blissful and bond with your baby right away and everything's great. And I remember we came home from the hospital, and my parents were there that day, and they were lovely, and they went to leave, and I just started crying because I was like, oh my god, I can't do this. And my mom was like, do you want me to stay? And literally they just stayed and slept on our couch. But it was just so reassuring to me. And I think that the next night she would not sleep at all. Like she'd not go down for naps. There was nothing. And I'm sure she was feeling like all my anxiety, and that was transferred. But I was like, oh my God, this child is never gonna sleep. I'm never gonna sleep. And you become like just that, like what you picture, the lunatic mother kind of thing, which and you're not. It's just like you're normal, and you have a new baby, and you haven't slept, and you have all these hormones coursing through your bodies. And I'm also very lucky. I had friends who were like, this is what you're going to go through. Like, here's some things to look out for. And my mom had postpartum depression. So she was also very like keen on watching things I did and things like that. But, I'm very lucky. And I realized that of how much support I had. And not everybody has that. And even just for other mental health stuff, like, just being a teenager is hard enough as it is. And then, you throw social media on top of it. It's no surprise that teens are depressed and anxious and everything. And so it's so important to talk about, like, my daughter's 10, and we talk about all this stuff. Like, sometimes I get really anxious about stuff, and that's okay. And so we talk about it. Or, if you feel this way, like, that's okay. Like, however you feel is okay, but let's talk about it. And even things like that, like you hear people with commit suicide, things, and you just wish you could reach out and help them. You want to say there's help. So, the new 988 number is a great thing because nobody remembers whatever the 1-800 number was to call, but like 988 people can remember. And it's helping, and the saving lives, and it's making a difference. It's just having conversation. You know, it sounds cliche to say, oh, you're so brave for talking about this. But like when people aren't, And if you talk about, you don't know how much of a difference that might make to somebody else just by hearing your story and go, oh my gosh, I feel like that too. Or like, oh, like there's kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, oh, okay, like I can get help or I can do this. And, that's the one thing of local news that is so important because people still actually pay attention and read and listen and watch local news. And so when we can share stories like that and say, this program is going on, or this happened, and now this person's trying to make a difference, you never know who you're going to reach out and like touch by that.
Okay, but another aspect of it is, let's say, like on LinkedIn, for instance, when people discuss this, I think those posts are interesting, but somebody might say, oh, this is TMI, it's not professional. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, sometimes, I mean, social media is a vast land of interesting things. I think with maybe is appropriate for Instagram might not necessarily be so appropriate for LinkedIn, or like what's okay for TikTok is not, you know, okay for Reddit. I don't know. Like there's all various things, or like things you'd put on Snapchat, you wouldn't necessarily put out on Twitter, X, or whatever it is now. Um, so it's kind of time and place. And I feel like LinkedIn too is kind of evolving and changing because it used to be very much like it was a networking thing and like you knew people and that's how you got jobs. And now there's much more posting and there's posting about issues and things like that. And some people keep it very professional and other people are like, hey, let's talk about this. And I think there's a place for everything. I mean, it's hard when you say like TMI because there are some things that's like, well, one person's TMI is another person's never enough. So, it's all balance. And it's
Yeah.
also what you're comfortable with. If like somebody puts something out there that you're like, oh, hey, like that's a little much for me, then and like maybe you don't watch it. It's almost like there are certain shows that I will watch with my daughter and certain shows that no, she's not going to get to watch because appropriateness, age level, all that stuff. So I think you have to find like your own balance.
Yeah. Okay, now there's another thing connected to mental health because so you work at the station, they're supportive, and I think your station's union, right?
So yeah, we are a WGA union. We also have the IBEW, and we have who am I forgetting? We have our stagehands, IATSE. I
Okay.
think that's everybody. I don't think I left anybody out. But
Okay,
but
because
we also have non-union people who work there.
okay, but I basically, if you're in a union, you have issues, you can always go to the union and say, "Hey, we got this issue over here," and you have some support. But what I noticed, I've never worked in TV, but what I've noticed is in smaller markets, people are thrown out there, their MMJs, multimedia, and they have to report and edit and do all these things, and they feel in danger, and the companies don't back them up, and they also aren't paid well. So then people wonder, "Oh, we need more producers. Why aren't people going to TV?" And it
It's a
seems like it's not a good situation for recent grads to go into, or am I wrong?
you have to find the right place for you. You ideally we would all work in a great supportive company where they're like, you have all the resources you need. But that's not realistic. Like it still is financial and it's a business and these companies want to make money. So I always tell my students when you're going on an interview, remember you're interviewing them too. It's not just about you impressing them. You want to know if you're a good fit for the newsroom or what their policies are or what they do. I mean, back in the day, an MMJ used to be called a one-man band, and it was kind of like, well, that's what you do in the small market. And then you move up and you don't have to do that anymore. You're just a reporter or you're just a photog or whatever you're doing. And that's not the case anymore. There's so many MMJs throughout the company or throughout the country in every newsroom. Um, and it depends on your newsroom. Like I am of the opinion that an MMJ should not be doing a live shot by themselves anywhere, just because of no matter where you're set up, you don't have the same awareness of who's around you, be it for just people walking down the street or like a traffic issue. Like we've seen over and over again where people are doing live shots and a car comes barreling at them. And thankfully, everybody has been okay. But It's a scary, scary thing. So there's safety in that, much less if, you have somebody doing a story and they're perhaps not going into the best area. That's a safety thing because there's no one else there with them. Um, so I think, and you have to have the supportive news director who understands that. And in the smaller markets, they're pushing budgets, they're trying to do more with less. And generally, the managers in smaller markets have less experience. So they don't know things. And you have, like you said, you have a staff who is afraid to speak up, maybe because they need this job, it's their first job. They don't have enough experience to know, is this what happens everywhere? Is this okay? So so that's the other reason too. I keep in touch with a lot of my former students and they'll tell me what's going on and they'll ask for advice, or they'll say like, hey, is this normal, or what should I do about this? That's also part of the reason why you're seeing just issues with TV news, because it's not even starting necessarily in the small markets. It's starting in college where kids are not going into it, they're not being encouraged. Or unfortunately, we had a president for 4 years who said journalists were the enemy. And when that's in people's heads, that's hard to combat. Like, people hear that over and over again. And even if you don't believe it, it's still in your head where you're like, oh, or you have somebody saying, well, if somebody says that, are you going to be safe doing your job? And that's really scary to think about, is that people will hear you're a journalist and just like, well, you're scum of the earth. And you're like, I'm just trying to tell you what's happening in your community. Like, I'm trying to work with you. Um, so it started in college, and then so you have a smaller pool going into the smaller markets, and then you have a smaller pool moving up, and then people just were exhausted. I mean, and it's not like news is the only industry which hit the pandemic hard, where people were just like, I don't want to do this anymore. There was a lot of like work balance, work life kind of choices, and they're just like, I'm not willing to give this up anymore. I've had a lot of friends who were just like, no, I'm out, and they were really good. And it's sad because journalism is worse off because they do a different job now, but I also, their mental health is better, or like their balance with their family is better. It's a big choice. It would be nice if we could develop a better pipeline, but I mean, that's like a big problem. That's way above my pay grade kind of problem. But it's, I know it's something that people are looking at, and people way above me are focused on it and trying to see what they can do. But yeah, it's hard, but we keep plugging.
But was there a better pipeline when you were younger, when you were in college?
I think in some ways people were more committed. Like when I went to my first job, I got paid. I was producer in Fort Wayne. I was a morning show producer, and I think I got paid like $24,000. And like I remember being like, oh my gosh, this is so much money. But I also was very fortunate as I didn't have the debt that other people did. Like, I had scholarships. I worked during college, and my parents had put away some money for me. So I did not come out with the $100,000 or more in student debt that people are now. So I could afford to do it. But I remember one of my coworkers, she would go to work, and then she was the host. Where was she the hostess at? She was a hostess at like one of the restaurant chains. So she would go and she would work like during the day, and then at night she'd work another 4 hours as a hostess at the restaurant chain. And I was just like, so minimum she was working 12 hours a day. And like, it wasn't like she's just like, I'm just doing that for fun. It was like, I need to pay my electric bill, and it was stuff like that. And now there's a much more common thing where people have multiple jobs to do this, or they work part-time in news, and then they have another job, like they have a regular full-time job. And it's just hard. And like, that to me, those are the people you want, because they are dedicated. Like, I'm like, I would like one job, and that is like, I don't need extra jobs. It's too much. And then two, you're not getting the best from your people when they're exhausted. Like, you can't work that much. It's too hard. but I think it was a little bit of people were more, they had more flexibility, more, it was easier to kind of handle the, you're going to go to a small market and make no money, but you're going to be there for a year and a half, 2 years, and then you're going to get a better job. And then after that, you're going to get a better job and things like that. And now it's kind of like, no, I don't want to wait. I don't want to do that. I don't want to, I don't want to quote unquote pay my dues. And I mean, I understand that. Like, if you're leaving school with all that debt and it's like, oh, you're probably never going to be able to buy a house, or like you might be able to pay back your student loan when you're like 70, like that's a lot. And then to say like, you have to deal with all the just hardships of the job. Like I understand why people are like, I don't want to do that. But if
But
you
some
love
people
it,
but some people don't pay their dues. They don't understand some basics and then they skip and then they get to a better job or a bigger market and they really don't know much, or they
Mhm.
don't understand history or context, or they don't respect older workers, or I've just seen all these different things.
there's
So I
a
think that you sort
I
of need
think
to
there's
learn. Well, also you need
yeah.
to learn, like you need to learn from the people who've been there for a while instead of saying, "Oh, they're old. What? They're boomers. They're out of it." It's like, what do you know? How do you know that? Like, you know how much they've seen in their lives and how much reporting they've done, and they're an anchor now because they did do that reporting. They did do that reporting on floods and everything, and they just sort of want to skip ahead. I'm not saying everybody's like this, but I have met some people like that.
Oh yeah. There's always people who are just like, I'm gonna move up really fast. And you just kind of look and smile and go, you're so pretty. Because it like you're not gonna be able to tell them. Those are the people who are not gonna listen to you. So
Right.
hopefully, like when I came to our newsroom 20 years ago, because I'm the old lady now, I was one of the youngest people in the newsroom. And like now I look at some of my coworkers and they were young, they're younger than I was when I started. And I'm like, oh, all right. There is a little bit of like, oh wow. But I'm like, they're usually like they'll come to me and say, like, hey, can you help me with this? Or what do you think? Or we'll talk about different things. Like, and I think we've tried really hard to foster a kind of community where it's just like, if you don't know, ask, because it is so much better to just be like, hey, I'm not sure, let's ask, rather than, well, I'll just do it and maybe make a mistake. Maybe it'll be right, or maybe it'll be screwed up, and then we'll all have to fix it. So it's like, just ask. And we have a new coworker now who's lovely, and she's just like this little sponge, and she's like, she wants to soak everything in, and she's always asking questions, and she has a little notebook, and she writes everything down, and she's so diligent. And there's part of me that's like, oh, you give me hope for the future, like, yay. And that's the other thing with the students who I teach, like, they're not taking it lightly. They're in and they mean it. Like, occasionally I'll have people who are like, yeah, this is just my elective or whatever, which is fine too. Like, I think that's great, like, go learn more stuff. um but like the students who I work with are generally like, yeah, this is what I want to do, I'm committed, I'm going to go for it. And they're figuring out their path, which is nice to see. And that's another thing that gives me hope, where it's like, oh, okay, journalism will be okay, we'll still have the people asking the hard questions and going to our leaders and like not letting them slide on stuff, they're holding them accountable.
Yeah, so in terms of the, like, let's talk about the Chicago politics, for instance. I mean, is there the perception that they're available for questions and so forth? Because
It's
like I remember
really
Daly with like Daly was sort of old school, be like, "Nyeh," and then he'd sort of be able to get around. I don't know. It seems sort of tough to crack.
um it's funny, especially in the Chicago mayor's office. For a while, there's been very much of like a I have to control the message kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I mean, anybody who's worked in politics knows you can try your best, but like things will get out there and you have to answer them. Um, I think politicians need to make themselves available to the public. Like, we pay your bills. Like,
Also, we are in a free country, so that, I
right.
mean, freedom of the press. Yeah.
You have to come and talk to us. Like, is it fun all the time? No. Are we going to ask you really tough questions? Yeah. Like, and it's like, do I want to do your job? No. That's why I didn't run for mayor. But it's hard and it's really frustrating. Um, not even as a journalist, but just as a voter and a citizen, when you see these politicians who are ducking out of press conferences or who they'll only go to the photo ops and like their press people will send out a thing saying like no availability, no
Right.
questions. And you're just like, I mean, that's why we get people shouting after you or running down the hall or whatever. And it's very frustrating because it's like, dude, I pay your salary. Like, I want answers on this stuff. I want to know what you're doing. Like, you work for me. And there's different things. Like, I mean, every so often, it's like, yes, people do deserve some amount of discretion or privacy or things like that. Like we saw in the national media when the Secretary of Defense, he had to reveal that he had prostate cancer because he was in the hospital. And it's unfortunate that he had to give his private health information out, but also as a public person, like if you're in the hospital and you can't do your job, you're giving it to the second in command. I think the public does kind of deserve an explanation. And they didn't do the best job about talking about that. That could have been handled a lot better. But either he didn't have the right people around him saying like we need to tell people, or he made the decision, and unfortunately that was not the best way to go. But like that's for the most part it's just like you're showing up to an event, just talk to the media. I remember Richard M. Daley was really good about doing that. He held a lot of press conferences, but if he was at an event, he would go and have like a little side huddle with different reporters, and they could ask him stuff. And he definitely did not like all the questions, and he would get riled up and mad, but I think he understood this is my job. And so when you have a politician who doesn't understand that, be it like alderman, mayor, governor, whatever, especially covering them, it's very frustrating because you're just like, I just want to ask you about something. And like sometimes it's they don't want to talk about something else, which okay, but you need to talk about things. You need to talk about the public. That's your job. And if
Yeah.
you don't like it, you shouldn't have run for office.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I noticed like Durbin and Pritzker, this is based on my experience. It's like, yes, they would go to this ribbon cutting thing and they would always go to the side. He's like, okay, let me set up here. Let me get out of the way. I'm like, this is cool. And then that, people could ask them questions. Now, of course, they're not going to answer questions for 3 hours, but
Right.
and like they would say, okay, what about the such and such? Like something that was out in the press. And they're like, okay, blah, 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 blah. Well, at least they gave their opinion. At least they're aware of the issue out there. But I think, that's the thing about our system is I think people don't understand is some people don't understand that a lot of countries don't have that freedom, that it's all
Oh,
one
right.
way.
Right.
So,
Where it's just they send out the message, the media puts it out. Like, Russia's a great example about it, where they look like they're normal newscasters and journalists, but like they have, some government overlord in their control room watching what goes out. And it was recently where the one on air journalist went and talked about the war in Ukraine and what was happening. And they thought she was going to be murdered. And I can't remember exactly. I know she got out of the country, but I mean, that's terrifying to think that you're just telling people what happened, um and that you could die for it.
mhm. Now, one thing I do notice though is like let's say the person, the official, is not talking to the press. Like this is what I've noticed is that then a journalist can sort of talk to like if they build trust with people, they can talk to other people sort of a little outside and they can get some information and then they confirm it, with other sources. So that's one thing way I've seen that they get around that. What do you think of that?
Oh, well, as a journalist, you're always trying sources, like, because you don't usually, it's very rare you have access to the actual big person in charge, like I don't just pick up my cell phone and call Mayor Johnson and say, like, so how's this going? Like,
Right.
we'll call his office, or like our reporters have different sources in there. There's always somebody you can get to, or like maybe you talk to an alderman about what they think of it. And then sometimes too, you can kind of backdoor things where you're like, hey, we really would like a comment from you, and it gets in different ways. I mean, it'd be nice if it was just like, let us ask you a question and you will answer it, like honestly, straightforwardly, and truthfully. And, sometimes that happens, but yeah, other times there's just like, or they'll send you on not a wild goose chase exactly, but they'll make you like, instead of just being like, here's the paper you need, they'll make you request all the records and then you have to go through and find the needle in the haystack. And, it's frustrating, but it's also really rewarding because you're like, yes, I got what I need and I can tell these people and this is going on. And, especially with government, because there's so many lawyers involved, they bury things in paperwork. And I mean, that's their job. And so you'll be reading over the 1,000-page budget. And on page 942, there's like some item that you're like, wait, we paid for a gold toilet. And, but like most people don't take the time or frankly don't have the time to go through things like that. And that's why local journalism is so important, not just in Chicago, but in the smaller towns, because somebody needs to keep an eye on the people running things so that you don't have a big like you don't have people stealing money or that people misusing funds or like paying their brother-in-laws to do things, so that there's some other oversight to make sure that the people are getting what they need and what they paid for.
Yeah, well, see, I think also what people have to do is, okay, it's very hard if you're in a situation where there are corrupt things going on and you have to become the whistleblower. So either then you
Mm-hmm.
have to go to the media, then you have to go on the record, and then your career is going to be destroyed or you could be destroyed. And I think that's another reason why we don't find out about certain things because people are afraid to speak up.
And it's so much easier too just to stay quiet. Like, you don't want to put your neck on the line. Like, I think everybody understands that, where they're just like, okay, well, this isn't right, but it's going to cause me all kinds of drama if I say something. I think just everyone sort of does that on the daily. It's obviously much smaller stakes for little things, be it like, your husband and wife interaction or something to do with like school, job, your coworkers, whatever. But like when something is doing wrong and you have somebody come forward to the media and say, hey, this is happening, you know, I've talked with our reporters when they're like, I have the source, but they don't want to come forward because they're afraid of retaliation, which is a very real fear. Like, I mean, we've seen over and over again people lose their jobs or even, just the public perception of them, or like their reputation gets smeared because somebody is trying to stay out of jail or trying to stay in office or whatever they're doing. So it's a hard thing to be a whistleblower if you do it through official channels or if you go and you tell your story to someone in the media.
Yeah. No, okay. So you were saying earlier you love your job even on the difficult days, when you're waking up. I'm sure if you wake up at 2 or 3 a.m., it's freezing outside, it's below zero, you have to get in and. But what do you love about doing what you're doing and journalism?
Um, I love being able to tell people what's going on, from like the littlest story to the bigger one. And so right now we are live on the air. We have shows on broadcast if you turn on channel 2, and we have shows that are stream only. So if you go to cbschicago.com, you can watch us anytime. We are live from 4:30 in the morning until 11:30. And I work on almost every single one of those shows. Sometimes I work on the 5, but usually it's the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And I write different stories for them. I work with our reporters. So I get really jazzed because I do a little bit of everything. And I work with so many people. So I feed off their energy too. And it's just, you're telling people about things they need to know, be it like, hey, there's a big storm coming tomorrow, you're going to want to leave early, things like that, to I'm trying to think what else I wrote today. I wrote about Ryan Field in Evanston on Northwestern campus. They're starting all the prep work for construction for the renovation of Ryan Field, which was a very controversial thing. People, however you fall on it, like, you can admit there was controversy. Some people were excited, some people really don't want it. Um, so I get a little taste of everything, and it's fun. And then there are other days where I produce a show, so then I'm making decisions about what story goes in, what goes where, how much time things get, what we run, what we don't run, different guests we have on. Like, that's another big part of my job now. I do a lot of our segments. I help the other producers, I book them, I set them up, different things. And it's fun to kind of see like we're gonna have one on Wednesday talking about financial literacy. I can't see. This is why I'm not on air. I don't talk, but we're talking about financial literacy, and we're taking a look at it from a bicultural um, aspect. And we have an author on, and she says she's writing for first generation Latinas. And so for some people to understand, like, oh, hey, I have my banking account, a checking account, I got a mortgage, things like that. If she's dealing with all that, she's also dealing with like her family, who maybe her parents think like, you're going to help me in retirement. Like, I don't need a 401k or an IRA because you're going to take care of me. And, so it's an interesting, and like how to take care of yourself and how to have conversations with families about different things. And even just like generational wealth that like some ethnicities have and some ethnicities don't. Some people pass things down to their kids, and others are like, good luck to you, have a nice life, and dealing with that. So we're working on things like that. I'm working with her to say like, this is what we'd like to talk about, and like how we frame it and how we make it work for TV too. Cause she's an author. She also does TikTok and Instagram, and she's a big following. So she kind of gets it more than some people, but
Right.
you have to work with some of your guests and say like, this is how we're going to make this visual and interesting. Like, like not to say whatever they're obviously interesting because they're coming on to talk about something, but like, let's make it so that everybody can appreciate it.
Well,
But
then
it's so fun doing that.
that's cool. How do you find your guests? And do you have any advice for people who do want to get to be on a segment?
Um, a little bit of everything. We get pitches all the time. So we'll get pitches from PR people. Sometimes it's just something you see that makes you go, huh. Like I'm working on another segment now that just developed out of just a random conversation where we were saying like, oh, kids don't get enough consumer education. So we're like, oh, well, let's talk about that. Sometimes you'll just see like, hey, this is going on in the library. What a cool program. Let's talk to them about that. Or just people will mention things, and it just like triggers like that spark in your head of like, oh. And I had something my neighbor said the other day, just random conversation. And I was like, oh, that would be a really good story. Or it's just like there is that really true thing of everybody has a story.
Right.
So you talk to people, and that's like the biggest thing. You're just out in your community talking, and people will give you stories. Or you see something like on social media on Facebook, and you're like, oh, hey. So a little bit of like inspiration kind of comes from everywhere.
That's really cool. Now, what if somebody wants to be featured on a segment?
They can always, well, you can always send an email. We have a tips email. I don't want to give it out because I'm
no, you don't have to get it out. I'm just, but no, it's fine.
If you go to CBS Chicago, I'll tell you like the wrong ad or the underscore or something. But if you go to cbschicago.com, there is a place where you can email like news tips to, and you can say like, hey, I have this really great idea for a story. And we do different segments. Like Joe Donnellan, our 10 p.m. anchor, does this great segment called Hidden Gems, where he features somebody that you may not know about that's doing something really cool in the community. A couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, he had this cool story about it's a gelato place. I think it's in Lincoln Square, and they're also doing like magic performances.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's just really like unexpected and kind of a fun thing, and it's very community vibe and stuff like that. And just kind of like places that you wouldn't think about. Or we have a theater segment Vince Gerasoli does every Friday. Who's Got Your Ticket? And it's just like, I think we know a little bit more about Broadway in Chicago, but he'll talk to the actors or the directors or the behind the scenes people and say like, well, what inspired you for this? What goes into this? And those are just kind of the segment things we do. But like all the reporters too, you can always email the reporters and say like, hey, I have this story idea. And like all their bios are on the website, and you can click and send them email and say like, hey, I think this would make a really good story. And then, we'll make some calls and do some research, and maybe we'll do a story.
And then it has to match what your audience wants, right? Or like the kind of audience you have.
I mean, I think you think about who you're serving. Um, but good story is a good story. Like
Yeah.
a good story will appeal to everybody. And my bosses have told us, you concentrate on content and we'll worry about the ratings. We'll worry about the financial side. So like
Wow.
you focus on your job, which is really nice because, like it's such a hard thing because I can't go into people's homes and turn on their TV and say, like, you should try this. It's really great. Like you can do that and spread your word of mouth and say, hey, we're doing all these great things and use social and whatever. But at the end of the day, you can't force people to watch. The only thing I can do is put together good pieces and have interesting content and say, here you go. And I hope you enjoy it.
Because I have a question about, how do you what kind of advice do you have for people who are working in the media or they want to be in the media? They go to school because there are a lot of students who belong or are involved with INBA too. And they're just really coming up against challenges or roadblocks or, how do people persevere if they know they want to be a journalist?
You do have to have a thick skin.
Yes.
You do have to get used to being told no and saying like, well, that's okay. And not internalizing it. Like I think that's really hard for a lot of people to overcome because it's hard to be told no. But thick skin is the one thing, and basically you just keep at it. Like you said, perseverance. You just keep going and you keep doing your best. And then I think too, even when you get your gig, you have to realize that you're going to have to evolve and you always want to keep growing. And yeah, it's just like you're never done. Like there's always set yourself up new challenges, try new things, like always try and be better. But I mean, it really is. It's determination and perseverance. And like I said, if you love it, you're gonna do it. Like because sometimes it is a lot. Like and there have been I think every journalist has had days or weeks or whatever where they are like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Or like, maybe I got to think of something else. Because they're like, even in the best of times, you'll have a hard day. And then, when it's really down, it's hard to get up and go and work. So that's why you have to think like, this is my passion. This is what I love. I want to do this. And just kind of like let that fill you and like and sometimes there are days where you're just like, I'm just gonna make it through the day. You have that goal of like, and sometimes your goal is like, I'm gonna make it through the next 10 minutes. And then you do, and then before you know it, the day is done and you're good to go.
But I think one thing is that you see, you've been in journalism the entire time. I think that what people don't understand is it's extremely stimulating. And the people you work with are usually really sharp and edgy and when you go to the rest of the world, you're like, wow, things seem so easy. I mean, but like, and that brings up my thing. I'm surprised that former journalists are have any kind of hard time getting another kind of job because they're at maximum. They're operating at maximum.
I just had a friend post. She's kind of she's a little off brand of journalism, so she's still sort of in it, but not exactly. And she had this big post about hire a journalist. We're deadline
Yep.
driven. We get stuff done. We don't wait. We proofread. We know spelling, like, and
Yep.
all these lists of like why you should hire a journalist. And for my friends who have left journalism, a bunch of them have gone into another field of communication, whether it be PR or corporate communication or things like that. And I've had most of them will say they'll be in a meeting, they'll be like, okay, you can get that done, and they'll be like, okay, great, and they'll go back to their office and they'll write out whatever press release or whatever thing they need to send, and they'll have it done within an hour, and then their boss is like, oh, I meant like by the end of the week.
Right.
And it's like, you think it's going to take a whole week to do that? Like
Right.
it's funny. I just had a conversation with somebody about calling to verify something or calling to make sure we're on schedule. And I was just like, oh God, I'm like, my producer vibes are like going off where I don't want to be that obnoxious person where it's like, hey, it's been an hour. Are you done yet? Did you make a decision? Did you, because, we're so like used to like,
Mhm.
I need it now, now, now. And the rest of the world is not like that. it's really interesting. Like I've had people, when we're in different negotiations, it's say like, well, this is a 24/7 business and you need, the world is operating 24/7. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not. Because if I
Right.
call the mayor's office for comment on something at 4 a.m, shocker, nobody is going to be
Yeah.
there, and it's just like we are 24/7, but not like the entire world's not. There's stuff going on and you need to cover and you need to be on it, but you're not going to get all those people on the phone. Like when we were covering Dixmoor this morning, they had their water main breaks started at like 3 a.m. And to his credit, the village president was out there and up and doing stuff. But like that is a rare exception. Like though, for the most part, like especially in the smaller places, the mayors are relatively good. They'll get out there early and stuff, but they're not out there right away. It's like not enough that I can go up and talk to them about it. So
Yeah, because also another thing I notice is and this is advice for people, is if you send out a press release, you better pick up your phone and pick up your phone at 3 a.m. if necessary, because you know how it is. When you have to prep for a morning show, you have to get the content out there. And by 9 o'clock, it's too late. And sometimes the show is over by then. So,
I
I
enjoy
don't
when
know.
we call the smaller towns for be it their police or fire or like, their mayor's office, whoever. And, we're live on the air. We're talking about whatever's going on there. And they'll be like, we'll get back to you after 9 a.m.
Right.
You're just like, it's
But it's
too
not just that.
late.
No, but even other things too, where somebody's pitching an idea and it's like, okay, we want to do your story in the morning, and you call and like, wow, or you email like, why aren't you getting back to me? I mean, you said you wanted this, so you got to be available. I mean, the press is 24 hours, but you have to also be if you want your story out there. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a hard thing because a lot of people go into PR because they don't want the 24/7 nature of news. And so you're like, oh, but sometimes you have to. And that's hard. That is hard because I know like when my phone is off, I am off. Like I am not available. I'm doing my family thing. I'm doing, whatever self-care I'm doing. And like, no, you're not reaching me. Sorry.
Right. Well, but that's different because you already have your set hours at the station. But okay, now is it true that I heard this many years ago? Some TV people were giving this advice. TV producers. I don't know if you were even there at this meeting. I think it was a public relations society meeting, and they said if you want your story out there, Saturday's a good place to try to place it. A good time to try to place it. Is that true?
Oh, like on a Saturday morning?
Yeah, like
Uh
no, I mean like if you got a story to pitch or a feature or whatever, then Saturday's a good time because it's a slower news day. Is that true?
um I mean, it really depends on your story. Um,
Like a feature
sometimes,
story.
sometimes yes, because there's more content to fill, but also there's fewer people working on the weekend. So it's kind of a trade-off. And I think people look and they're always like, well, I mean, like kudos to that PR person who's looking a little bit more to see like which is the super hard news show and which is more lighter. Because I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten PR pitches from people that clearly have never watched the show that you're
Right.
and I always try and be polite and, as nice as I can be and say that's not something we would do. And like you hope they kind of get the message. But there's sometimes like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why would you think that this is a good thing for our show? And then sometimes you have some stations that are like, yeah, let's do the fun featurey food drink segment, or like let's do this or let's do that. And you have other stations that are like, absolutely not. We only do hard news and that's it. And it's like, okay, but if you're the PR person, it's your job to know which is which, because
Right.
otherwise you're not doing your job. And like I won't want to work with you. Like I have a list, and pretty much I can count on one hand the really good PR people that I will call and say, I'm looking for this person. Do you have any ideas? Or can you direct me in the right way? Or like when they send me something, I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. And then there are other people. There is like a whole company that I have banned from my email. They all go to junk email because they're just not good. And it's unfortunate, but it's also like, I know that this is a waste of my time and I don't have time to waste. So I'm not gonna read your email, and like maybe you'll get better in the future, but for right now, like nope, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, now, like I said, to reiterate, I've never worked in TV, and but I know on the radio side, I don't think there's a lot of respect for the behind the scenes people. And it really depends, but it's rare that there is respect. That's my personal opinion and based on my experience. In TV, is that similar where the people behind the scenes aren't as respected as the people on the air? And I'm not talking about from the public, I'm talking about within the business.
Um, I mean, I've never felt that.
That's
But I
good. In
also
20 years, you've never felt that? That's
I mean,
amazing.
there's always going to be one jerk. There's
Of
always,
course.
doesn't matter where you are, there's always one jerk who like has a inflated opinion of himself or herself. But for the most part, like no, and especially as a producer and people knowing that I'm in demand and like I'll leave and you'll have a real hard time replacing me, like
Wow.
I'm not going to act that I'm irreplaceable. Like no, like I'm also, I realize that someone could come in the next week, but I've never really felt like this, oh, you're just behind the scenes. Like I've never really felt
Wow.
that attitude too much. And I also feel like that's probably me because I don't take people's junk. Like I will speak up and I have no problem saying like you're being rude or like I don't think you should have said that. Like I will do it and like I'm not going to call you out in front of the whole group, but I will have a conversation and say, I'm sure you didn't mean it to come off this way, but this is how it came off. But also I'm the kind of person that's like, hey, let's collaborate, let's work together. So maybe that's why I've never felt that. Um, but I mean, I have had colleagues who've had stories of maybe on air people not being so polite or or just making their life a bit of a nightmare, and that's really unfortunate because at the end of the day what we're doing is a team sport. We need everybody to work together. Like if I'm having a bad day, nobody knows my name. Like I can go to the grocery store and nobody is like, wow, Beth really messed up that show today, but they're going to look at my anchor and they might say like, oh yeah, she had a rough time. If you have a good anchor, they can save it even if you're screwing up. If you have a bad anchor, a producer can make them look really good, and you would hope that you have collaboration where everybody is on team good and it works together. And that's the other thing too. You're going to know who has like an attitude or who like is a user and you don't want to work with them. And so you just don't. Um, and I'm lucky. I've always gotten to work with good people. I'd like to think it's because I'm good, but I also realize that I'm very fortunate. I'm very grateful for all the people I've gotten to work with, all the experience and all the things that they've shown me and things like that. And I think that's important to pass it on too. Like spread kindness like it's confetti. Let's all lift each other up. There's no like first or last place in the newsroom. There's just, we all work together. And, if somebody's having an off day, let's figure out how to raise them up and how to support them. So tomorrow they'll have a better day.
Wow, that sounds really nice. I
I
I
mean, I'm
rarely
kind of positive, I have my moments.
right. And also, let's talk about the WGA, Writers Guild of America East. You're
Okay.
on the board. Okay, so why did you run for the board? What's going on?
Um, it's funny. So we had our election. So I'm on the council. I represent the broadcast cable streaming sector.
And I did
Um,
vote for you. Okay, go
Thank
ahead.
you. I
When
appreciate
I
all
was
your
working in
support.
radio, when I was working in radio. Okay.
Um, so I got approached and somebody said that they thought I'd be really good at it. And I've been on negotiating committees when the WGA negotiates contracts with CBS. So I kind of knew some of the things that were going on. And they said, oh, I think you'd be really good at this. And my intention was to be like, no, I'm not interested. And then I talked to the woman who's currently our president because I have a kid, I have a crazy schedule, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can be of service. I don't want to just show up. I don't want to fill a seat. I want to do something. And so we had a really good talk. And then I was like, okay, I'll do this. And I'm still technically in my first term. This is only my second year on council. So I'm still learning. But it's been a really great opportunity. And just seeing how people work together and just the supportiveness of people coming together has just been great. And like, obviously there was the writer's strike this summer, which I personally wasn't on strike, but I was like, what can we do to support the screenwriters? And so I went on picket lines in March, and I had my cool signs, and, I talked to people, and we talked about amplifying voices. Like right now, the Onion Union is negotiating with their employer, and they're fighting for better work environment, better money, better benefits, all that stuff. And I think the one thing people don't always understand about unions is just you have more power when you come together. Like if you were to go to your boss and say, hey, I want a raise, maybe you would get it, maybe you wouldn't. You'd have to do all the work, and you'd have to have a compelling argument and things like that. When you have a union, people who are maybe too nervous to go and have that conversation, because let's admit it, sometimes it's really scary going in the boss's office. Like, like my boss is great, and she came down the hall, our big station boss today, and we were chatting, and I joked with her about something, and she's like, oh no, you'll be great. So, but I'm still like, I get nervous talking to her because she's the big boss. Like, she's a big deal. And I feel like I'm pretty confident. So if I'm going, oh, that makes you a little nervous, but there's strength in numbers. So it's nice to have that where you can go and say like, hey, this is something that we want. This is something we want to do. Let's talk about it. And they like companies have to pay more attention to that. If it's, if it's one person, they can kind of be like, yeah, we'll get to you. But if it's, 100 or 200 or 1,000, whatever it is, that's a much bigger deal. And then it was nice, especially this summer, to see how many unions came together and said, we're going to support you. Yeah. And, I don't think what anybody was asking for was too much. It's like, hey, we just want a bigger share of the pie. We're putting out this content. We would like to make some money, and we want some benefits, and we're concerned about this issue. So like, let's talk about it. But I also, my dad is an accountant, so I understand the other side where they're like, it's all numbers and money and things like that. But I just think it's great to have people supporting one another, and to say like, hey, I think it also sends a message to other union members of like, you're valuable, like you're part of this organization, and there's a belonging thing and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, but yeah, I do want to ask about that. Your dad's an accountant, but it's that's the other side is people are against unions. That's why there aren't many unions anymore in this country, because they think it, people say, so management thinks that it drives labor costs up so much that the companies will end up going offshore or going to the South, which is not union. And what about that side of it?
So, I mean, there is the number side of it. There's pros and cons to everything. Union membership across the country is going up right now because I think more and more people are seeing the value of it. But it depends on your union. Some unions are better than others. It depends on what you're doing. Not everything does need a union. Some companies are really great and they're good for their workers. Others maybe aren't. And it's good to have people saying, hey, it's also nice when you're in a spot where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. When you can go to somebody and say, can you help me? I don't know enough about all the numbers to say if it's bad or good for business. I mean, in my experience, it hasn't been bad for business. It's just, there's so many things on balance sheets where you can put things into a different column and say like, well, this is this and this is this. And like, numbers are numbers, but you can manipulate them enough to make them look for what you want. Like, we hear it all the time when there's stuff coming out in the stock market, like, oh, the company will say, well, we made so much money. And then when it's time, like when we just had the big three auto workers, they're talking about how great they are and their profits, and they want to look good to shareholders. But then when it comes to meet with the unions, they're like, oh yeah, we don't have any money for you.
Right.
And it's like, wait a minute, like, who are you lying to? And so it's a hard thing, but it is nice if you have a union that you have people who are monitoring that stuff, and you have people who, like the average worker is not going to necessarily know to look at a balance sheet and know what that is and what the profit factors are, or like all the mitigating things that they get, like if it's pension or health or 401k or how things are distributed or like your profit sharing and all that stuff that and like the average person can't just go, well, I'm going to go to a lawyer and they'll explain it to me. But like they can go to their union. The unions have lawyers and they have financial people and, they know a lot more and they can represent everybody to be in a better negotiating place.
And then what about the other argument against unions that says it protects lazy workers?
I mean, again, it depends on your unions. We've all worked with that one person who just takes advantage of whatever.
Because they know the rules and they go to the edge and they know they can't go beyond the edge. So they're making, like in some cases, they're making six figures and they're fulfilling what they're supposed to, but they're not chipping in anything extra. Like they're part of a union, but they're not necessarily a group player.
I think that's just life. You're going to have union or not union. There's always that one person who's like, I can just skate by and do the bare minimum and, and like the rest of the coworkers are like, dude, oh my God, I can't believe Joe's doing that again or, whatever. Right. And it's just what it is. And and that's every industry, union or not union. There's always like that one person that's going to, figure out how to just skate within the rules and do enough to keep their job and get by. And, everybody's annoyed, but there's not a lot you can do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so why do you think for the people who are in the WGA, I'm still in the WGA. Why do you think people should get more involved in their union?
Well, I think no matter what you do, if it's like your union, your school, your community, your church, have a voice. Say like, you're in this group for a reason. So be active, say what you want, try and, if you don't like something in it, try and change it. But I mean, it's again, if you're not involved, I'm very big on like, if you're not involved, you cannot complain about what happens. Like for people who don't vote, that drives me just insane because it's like, you want to be involved in what's going on in your community and you want to have a say. And I know you're going to complain about the politicians because Lord, everybody does. But if you don't vote, you really don't have a right to complain because you didn't do anything about it. Oh, that wasn't the guy you wanted. Did you go and vote for him? No. Okay, well then like get on it. Or if you don't like the choice of the people running, well, have you considered doing something? Have you running? Have you campaigned for someone else? Like, it can start at like the local level. And I'm not going to act like politics or that kind of thing is easy. I had a friend who was on the school board and like he made it seem like a fate worse than death because of like how some of the community members were and like things that he had no control over, they would come and complain to him about. And he's like, well, I can't do anything, but I'll listen to you. And a lot of times that's just what people want to do. They just want to be heard. But you also have to be active and make yourself heard.
Yeah. Okay. And anything else?
Anything else? Go to cbschicago.com/mental health minute/ and you'll find all of our previous mental health minutes and they're awesome. And my daughter just came home from school and she has her student newspaper. So we're training the next generation of journalists. So that's awesome. No, just thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me ramble.
Oh yeah, actually there's another thing. I noticed that you said you originally wanted to write for a newspaper, but have you noticed that in broadcast writing, it's to the point, you have to have a lead that's really straight. Like the first sentence has to be exactly what you talk about. And I notice like sometimes when I read longer articles online or something, the lead is like, what I consider the lead is like 3 paragraphs down.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sometimes like, yeah. In broadcast, it's like, you have people's attention span. You have one time to get them and to get them all of their information. They can't go back and read. I mean, like, I suppose with social media or like the DVRs or whatever, you can rewind, but no, you have one chance to get them. And so your writing better be clear, concise, straightforward, and you better have your message. And that's the big thing with Chicago. Like Chicagoans do not have time to mess around. They're like, I want my news. I want it straightforward and just give me what I need to know. And, Yeah, that's TV writing. It's you're having a conversation with the viewer. You're like, hey, here's what's important for the day. And let me tell you in a way you're gonna understand. Like I don't have to use big $5 words. I'm gonna tell you what's what.
Oh, and by the way, somebody said on Facebook, Lee Hope, Beth is great.
Oh, thanks,
Lee
Lee.
Hope
Lee is
said
one of
that.
our directors. He's awesome.
Oh, he's a director at CBS too.
Yes.
Oh, that's cool. And what does a director do?
So the best way I can put it, one of our other directors, Mark Shakin, has this great analogy. He said, the producer is the composer of the opera. The director is like the conductor, and your crew from reporters, anchors, camera people, all that stuff, they're your orchestra. So the producer kind of says, here's my work of art that I would like you to put on the air and interpret. And then the director is the one telling everybody, this is how we're going to do it. And this is how we're going to make it come to life.
Hmm. Okay. All right. And then I guess Lee's the only one. But yeah. So Lee, so it's cbschicago.com/mental health minute, or go to cbschicago.com and do a search for mental health minute.
Yes. And we
Okay.
have, I think we have 11 now. We have a whole bunch. We've been doing them for a couple months now. So go and search, give yourself a little boost. And it really will help your day. Just little things you can do to improve your life.
Okay.